Back. Hello, everyone. We'll be wrapping up for the week today. As usual, I have my tea. This is the tea I hinted at a couple of days ago. Amazon came, my absolutely phenomenal girlfriend. She's so great. Got me some. This is a little bit of a weird one. So it's like, no, I guess lefty stereotypes. It's lemongrass, but it's also pea flower and chamomile and a bunch of other stuff. And see if you can see it. Yeah, it's blue. It's blue. It's so weird. It looks like radioactive blue. Uh, it's from the pea flower, is my understanding. The pea flower dyes the water blue. It reminds me a bit. It's like it looks like it looks like Gatorade tea. If anyone's seen The Office, there's that scene of like, oh, I made, Aaron makes some tea for this old lady once, and it's like, what kind of tea is this? Oh, I just boiled some Gatorade. It's kind of like that. Yeah, it's energy drink tea. But it is pretty tasty. I'm particularly looking forward to making it as an iced tea. I think it would be quite good as that. As a hot tea, it's pretty good. It's not my favorite, but also my favorites are black teas, so it's pretty far from that. And shouldn't have too much black teas. There's a lot of caffeine, a lot of stuff. It's a good herbal tea to have. There's no caffeine, which is nice. And it's a nice soothing tea. Blue iced tea. That would be a topic of conversation. Yeah, exactly, Cam Gal. Yeah, I don't want to tell my friends about it. So when they first see it, be like, what the hell? Did you just bring a pitcher a pitcher of power? What does it taste like? Oh, it's blue flavored tea. And it's I don't know how much it comes across through my camera here, but it does look like kind of radioactive. The like color, it's like this bright blue. Well, I guess not that bright, but like it's a very very deep blue color. I don't know how to describe it other than like, if you saw like if you were reading a comic or something and there was radioactive runoff and it was this color, you wouldn't have any questions. Now, I don't mean that as a slight. I just mean that as like it's interesting. It's a as you said, Camgal, a topic of conversation. So, very very interesting tea. It's not the first blue tea we've found. It's just because Amazon Cane also found a pea flower tea, which is the same thing that's turning this blue. So we had seen it before. Uh, I just didn't realize the pea flower was in there until after I had made it. And so I was surprised to be like, oh, it's blue. How about that? And I think some of my family, when I made it for them, hadn't seen it before. It's very interesting. What's what's less interesting is what we're going to be doing today, which is, I mean, it is interesting, it's just in its own way, and it's going to be a lot to get through. Is we're going to be reading the Georgia indictment against Donald Trump. I know I had waffled about this a little bit as to whether we'd read it or not. The reason being, it's 98 pages, so we're going to do this over the course of 2 days. When we come back from the weekend, we'll finish it off. We'll leave you in suspense. You'll have the cliffhanger across the weekend. How will it end? But but I think it's worthwhile to do for a couple of reasons. One, we read the previous two. It's good to stay appraised. We didn't read the New York indictment. Maybe we'll come back to it at some point. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer. This isn't like I'm not a legal expert who can tell you anything more than about the legal side of this, but it's good to be informed. We saw the last two times that we read these indictments, the value of doing so, just even from a lay perspective. The first time it was good to know like what the evidence is, what's being quibbled over. It's not just that he had these documents, but he was trying to conceal them and that he was hiding them from subpoenas, so on and so forth. Okay, that's good to know. The previous indictment, the DC indictment, it was good to know that it was not really for inciting the riot on January 6th. It was not really about anything he said. It was about his concrete actions to prevent the correct the I guess to get in the way of the election process and to overturn it in his favor. So that was good to know. So we'll see what comes out of reading this indictment. Already, what we know is that there are more co-conspirators that are indicted here. I do like that. I mean, he's not the only person who was involved in this, and being complicit isn't a thing that you should be able to just walk away from. There's a possibility, however unlikely, that the DC case didn't indict the co-conspirators because they're cooperated or something that had some deal. I don't know. There are a lot of reasons it could be the case, but I'm glad that there is at least one instance where co-conspirators are being indicted as well, being charged. It says this case has 16 defendants, if I remember correctly, that are being tried simultaneously. And we did start reading this a little bit. We just got into like the introduction. I'll like do a quick recap in that for anyone who wants to like watch this video back on YouTube or something. So we'll go over the stuff that we've gone over already briefly. I won't read it in its totality. So we'll go over this, and then the other reasons. That's right, I forgot I was talking about that. ADD is, it's a wild ride. Another reason I wanted to go over this is the importance of this case in particular. All of these cases are important. Don't get me wrong. One of the things that we're starting to see, though, is because the judge in this case is not putting up with a lot, and or maybe it's the previous case, but like because of this, like the each successive indictment, Trump supporters are getting more and more inflamed. I've seen claims about death threats on the judge in one of these cases, including including like calling her a bunch of slurs. Uh, Trump fans are getting more and more agitated as these things go on. Now that said, that is a very bad reason to desist from this, but it's important to be aware of the context and why this is important. I know there's a lot of controversy about this, but they kind of need to see, well, you do crimes, and this is what should happen to you. And any instance they want to cry about other people doing crimes, then the answer is just, okay, they should be charged too, and it's a problem that they're not. But not to say, but remember, Trump supporters don't say, but Joe Biden or but Hunter Biden, to say the Biden should be charged with crimes and so should Trump. They never mean that. Not ever. Not once. They always mean the Biden should be charged and Trump should not be. So I want to remind everyone who was watching, like, anytime someone wants to try this, like, whataboutism of, like, oh, but the Hunter Biden blank story, whatever thing they made up, right? Remember the laptop used to have, it claimed to have child sexual abuse images and whatever? That just evaporated, right? Like, they make this stuff up all the time. None of it's real. But even if it were, they're not saying it with the idea of like, well, yeah, people who commit crime should be charged for doing so, irrespective of their position of power or their wealth. No, 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 no. It's always disingenuous. Like they're always just saying, yeah, charge the Bidens and not Trump, or look over here and ignore what Trump's doing. So we're not going to do that. We're going to pay attention to the matter at hand, a former president being charged with the crimes that they seem to have pretty clearly committed, in part leveraging their power as president. And hopefully we'll see some justice come out of this. So let's get to the indictment itself. From what we glanced over last time, the majority of the indictment has to do, or at least in terms of page count, has to do with the alleged violation of the RICO statute. It's the first count of the indictment. You can see all these many defendants. I believe this is every defendant, but possibly not. And the first count is the violation of the Georgia RICO statute. That's Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. We'll see what that involves, but yeah, you can see here even in the table of contents from page 20 to page 72. or sorry, not even sorry, from page 13 to page 72 is the first count. So that's going to be the majority of it. Seeing as though it's on page 72 lays out, we're probably not going to get through the entirety of the first count in one sitting. Maybe we will, but but maybe not. I guess it's like 60 pages. Maybe we'll do all of it. Maybe that'll be the goal to do the first count, and we'll come back for the remaining counts. There are 41 counts in the indictment. Most of them don't take up a lot of actual page count, except for the RICO indictment. As we saw in the introduction, so let's go. We'll start the introduction, even though we already read this. Defendant Donald John Trump lost the United States presidential election held on November 3rd, 2020. Never forget that. He definitely lost it. One of the states he lost was Georgia. Trump and the other defendants charged in this indictment refused to accept that Trump lost, and they knowingly and willfully joined a conspiracy to unlawfully change the outcome of the election in favor of Trump. That conspiracy contained a common plan and purpose to commit two or more acts of racketeering activity in Fulton County, Georgia, elsewhere in the state of Georgia, and in other states. Something to note here is what Trump's stated defense has been. Now, I don't mean his legal defense. I mean his public defense. And for the court of public opinion, he has been saying that there was no tampering with the election by him. There was only tampering of the election in Georgia. The things that have been debunked, as we saw in the previous indictment. But something to note about that is like his actions as laid out in the previous indictment are unjustifiable, even if there were election fraud in Georgia, and there wasn't. So note the flimsiness of his stated defense already. It's not like even if there was voter fraud in Georgia, and there was not, to be clear, that wouldn't why would you still shouldn't be getting false slates of electors and trying to sneak them into Congress and trying to calling up the Secretary of State of Georgia to be like, hey, I need you to like find 11,000 votes for me, it still doesn't make any sense that these actions would take place. All right. The enterprise. At all times relevant to this court of indictment, the defendants, as well as not named as though others not named as defendants, unlawfully conspired and endeavored to conduct and participate in a criminal enterprise in Fulton County, Georgia, and elsewhere. Defendants Donald John Trump, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani, John Charles Eastman, Mark Randall Meadows, Kenneth John Chesborough, Jeffrey Bossert Clark, Jenna Lynn Ellis, Ray Stalling Smith III, Robert David Cheeley, Michael A. Roman, David James Schaefer, Sean Micah Thresher Still, Stephen Cliffgard Lee, Harrison William Prescott Floyd, Trevin C. Cuddy, Sidney Catherine Powell, Kathleen Alton Latham, Scott Graham Hall, Misty Hampton, unindicted co-conspirator individual 1 through individual 30, and others known and unknown to the grand jury, constituted a criminal organization whose members and associates engaged in various related criminal activities, including, but not limited to, false statements and writings, impersonating a public officer, forgery, filing false documents, influencing witnesses, computer theft, computer trespass, computer invasion of privacy, conspiracy to defraud the state, acts involving theft, and perjury. The majority of these all of these are listed as other indictments. These are the criminal acts they're being charged with for having done. I guess the claim here is that these were done as members of a criminal organization towards criminal acts. This makes a lot of sense. I mean, they were working together to try to get Trump elected, right? That's what they were doing. Even by their own admission, they were working as an organization to do these things. It's whether these acts were illegal and whether they did them, which, well, we'll see. This criminal organization constituted an enterprise as that term is defined in the statute, that is, a group of individuals associated in fact. The defendants and other members and associates of the enterprise had connections and relationships with one another and with the enterprise. The enterprise constituted an ongoing organization whose members and associates functioned as a continuing unit for a common purpose of achieving the objectives of the enterprise. So this should be all very obvious but of course it's a legal case. It's a lawsuit, like it's a or a criminal case. You have to lay it out, even though it's painfully obvious to all of us. Like obviously, they're working together, but it's to lay out what do we mean by enterprise, and does this group meet this definition? If you don't do that, then like someone could argue, well, they're not an enterprise. It's just one of the things, some of the groundwork you have to lay. The enterprise operated in Fulton County, Georgia, elsewhere in the state of Georgia, in other states, including but not limited to Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and the District of Columbia. Remember, in the D.C. indictment, these were the states, if I remember correctly, these were the states listed as the ones the Trump campaign tried to get its fingers into and meddle in. The enterprise operated for a period of time sufficient to permit its members and associates to pursue its objectives. Manner and methods of the enterprise. The manner and methods used by the defendants and other members and associates of the enterprise to further the goal of the enterprise and to achieve its purpose included, but were not limited to, the following: false statements and solicitations of state legislatures. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, appeared at hearings in Fulton County, Georgia, before members of the Georgia General Assembly on December 3rd, 2020, December 10th, 2020, and December 30th, 2020. At these hearings, members of the enterprise made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election. We heard about these in the previous indictment. This was stuff like the video at State Farm Arena and the like. The purpose of these false statements was to persuade Georgia legislatures to reject lawful electoral votes cast by the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from Georgia. So yeah, like again, it's not that they wanted a recount done or they wanted to sort out this alleged fraud. It was they just wanted Georgia to throw out whatever results they had and instead put in a slate of electors that were for Trump. They didn't want to prove the fraud. They just wanted to be like, listen, we can't trust it. We'll just say that Trump won. That was more or less their approach. Members of the enterprise corruptly solicited Georgia legislators instead to unlawfully appoint their own presidential electors for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Donald Trump. Members of the enterprise also made false statements to state legislators during hearings and meetings in Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in November and December of 2020 to persuade legislators in those states to unlawfully appoint their own presidential electors. A lot of this is, as we've seen here, going to be stuff from the previous indictment, but there's going to be other stuff as well. So, hang on to your seats, I guess. False statements to and solicitation of high-ranking state officials. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, made false statements in Fulton County and elsewhere in the state of Georgia to Georgia officials, including the governor, the secretary of state, and the speaker of the House of Representatives. One thing I'm curious about, actually, we're going to take a pause here. Okay. Because there are many counts of false statements and writings, and it's one of those like, lying can't be illegal in Georgia, right? There's no way. There must be. Okay, so here's well, I guess this is false statements to police. A person will be guilty of making a false statement when they knowingly and willfully falsely conceal or cover up by any trick, scheme, or device a material fact, make false, fictitious, or fraudulent statement or representation in any manner within the jurisdiction of any department or agency of state government. So it's not that lying, or the government of any county, city, or other political subdivision of the state. So it's not that lying is the illegal part. It's lying to the government is illegal, I guess, in Georgia. If I'm reading that correctly. Any lawyers can correct me on that. Please, I would be very happy to be corrected. Where were we? Okay, members of the enterprise also corruptly solicited Georgia officials, including Secretary of State and the Secretary of State and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, to violate their oaths to the Georgia Constitution and to the United States Constitution by unlawfully changing the outcome of the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia in favor of Donald Trump. Members of the enterprise also made false statements to and solicited state officials in Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Something to note as well is that the false statements, it's not merely that you say something not true. It is that you're saying something you know to be untrue. And if I read that statute correctly, which we know the Trump campaign knew what they were saying was not true. We saw that in the previous indictment. They had been told repeatedly that what they were saying wasn't true. Creation and distribution of false electoral college documents. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, created false electoral college documents and recruited individuals to convene and cast false electoral college votes at the Georgia state capitol in Fulton County on December 14, 2020. After the false electoral college votes were cast, members of the enterprise transmitted the votes to the President of the United States Senate, the Archivist of the United States, the Georgia Secretary of State, and the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. The false documents were intended to disrupt and delay the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021, in order to unlawfully change the outcome of the November 3, 2020 presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. Similar schemes were executed by members of the enterprise in Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Remember, we read all of this in the previous indictment. I'm trying to go through this quickly because it is so long, and if we've seen it in a previous indictment, I just want to I'm just going to point that out and move on. You can go look at my previous coverage of that if you want more information, or read the indictment yourself. Also an option available too. Harassment and intimidation of Fulton County election worker Ruby Freeman. If you remember, this is a person who is it's like she and her, I think it was she and her daughter, or maybe it was her and her mother, I don't remember, it was a mother and a daughter who were harassed who were basically had the Trump organization was like pointing at them as like agents of fraud and sent their followers to harass them and ruin their lives basically. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, falsely accused Fulton County election worker Ruby Freeman of committing election crimes in Fulton County, Georgia. These false accusations were repeated to Georgia legislators and other Georgia officials in an effort to persuade them to unlawfully change the outcome of the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. In furtherance of this scheme, members of the enterprise traveled from out of state to harass Freeman, intimidate her, and solicit her to falsely confess to election crimes that she did not commit. Solicitation of high-ranking United States Department of Justice officials. Members of the enterprise, including several of the defendants, corruptly solicited high-ranking United States Department of Justice officials to make false statements to government officials in Fulton County, Georgia, including the governor, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the President pro tempore of the Senate. In one instance, Donald Trump stated to the acting United States Attorney General, "Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." Okay. Solicitation of the Vice President of the United States. Members of this enterprise, including several of the defendants, corruptly solicited the Vice President of the United States to violate the United States Constitution and federal law by unlawfully rejecting electoral college votes cast in Fulton County, Georgia. Now, they didn't just reject the Georgia votes, as we saw in the previous indictment, but remember, this is a case in Georgia, so it's not going to be... They're not going to be charging them for doing weird stuff in Michigan. Maybe Michigan will file their own charges. We might see charges from many of these states. We should be so lucky. By the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from Georgia. Members of the enterprise also corruptly solicited the vice president to reject votes cast by the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from several other states. But this is not, of course, it's not Georgia's jurisdiction. In a way, they don't care. I mean, they do, clearly, but it's not what they're being charged with, from what I can tell. Unlawful breach of election equipment in Georgia and elsewhere. Members of the enterprise. I'm going to start skipping where it says including several defendants. What this is here to say is that it wasn't done by people who aren't being indicted here, or at the very least, it was done in part by people being indicted here, and it's not all of the defendants, it's several of them. And, when they lay out the evidence in other stages of the process, that's when it'll be clear who did what and whatever. So I'm going to start skipping this, but we understand what this means now, right? Members of the enterprise corruptly conspired in Fulton County, Georgia, and elsewhere to unlawfully access secure voting equipment and voter data. In Georgia, members of the enterprise stole data, including ballot images, voting equipment software, and personal voter information. The stolen data was then distributed to other members of the enterprise, including members in other states. I want to remind you, if there were voter fraud going on, why would this be the way you attempt to address it? Like for real. Like if they actually thought like why would you be going out and like stealing voting machine software to prove it? Shouldn't you be like charging in court and having the state do that and whatever? We have laws in this country for a reason. It doesn't make any sense to do this if they're telling the truth, which obviously they weren't. I just want to be clear, like their actions demonstrate that they did not believe what they were saying. Ooh, ooh, ooh. That was a bit of lag. Obstructive acts in furtherance of the conspiracy and the cover-up. Members of the enterprise filed false documents, made false statements to government investigators, and committed perjury in judicial proceedings in Fulton County, Georgia, and elsewhere in furtherance of and to cover up the conspiracy. Acts of racketeering activity and overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. This is going to be the majority of the document from here. Yeah, we're on page 20. This is going to be the next 52 pages, so strap in, folks. Acts of racketeering activity and overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. As part of and on behalf of the criminal enterprise detailed above, the defendants and other members and associates of the enterprise committed overt acts to affect the objectives of their enterprise, including but not limited to: on or about the 4th day of November 2020, Donald John Trump made a nationally televised speech falsely declaring victory in the 2020 presidential election. This is easily verifiable, so if you don't believe me, just go look it up. Approximately 4 days earlier, on or about October 31st, 2020, Donald John Trump discussed a draft speech with unindicted co-conspirator Individual 1, whose identity is known to the grand jury, that falsely declared victory and falsely claimed voter fraud. The speech was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. On or about the 15th day of November 2020, Rudolph William Louis Giuliani placed a telephone call to... I really hope that they don't do the full... Yeah, they're going to do the full name. I'm going to try to shorten it because I do not want to read these. These are names and a half. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of name. We're gonna shorten it a bit. All right. Rudy Giuliani placed a telephone call to unindicted co-conspirator Individual 2, whose identity is known to the grand jury, and left an approximately 83-second long voicemail message for the unindicted co-conspirator Individual 2, making statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 election in Fulton County, Georgia. This telephone call was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. Now, I'm assuming that without knowing what the content of that voicemail is, it doesn't seem like that's what it would be, but that's the kind of thing that'll come out in discovery, I guess, and not in the indictment. I'm also going to try to skip over unindicted co-conspirator Individual number 2. I'll just do like Individual 2 or whatever. And we'll just do the last names. Just trying to we're speed running this, all right? We're trying to save them frames. On or about the 19th day of November 2020, Giuliani, Ellis, Powell, and Individual 3, whose identity is known to the grand jury. If we can skip this part too. There's so much to skip. Appeared at a press conference at the Republican National Committee headquarters on behalf of Donald Trump and Donald J. Trump for President Incorporated, the Trump campaign, and made you're happy to shorten the campaign name down to the Trump campaign, but you're going to put the full name. They might have to put these full names every time. I don't know. And made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia and elsewhere. These were so the last line is always going to be, these were overt acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. On or about the 20th day of November, Schaefer sent an email to Individual 4, whose identity... in the email, Schaefer stated that Hall, a Georgia bail bondsman, has been looking into the election on behalf of the president at the request of David Bossie, and asked Individual 4 to exchange contact information with Hall and to help him as needed. A lot of this is really vague, which makes it hard to appraise. Like, I can read through that and be like, oh, okay, so this guy talked to another guy and asked him for help, but, like, help doing what? It's not kind of information that I'm sure will come out in the process of this court proceeding, but it's not here, On or about the 20th day of November 2020, Trump and Meadows met with Majority Leader of the Michigan Senate, Michael Shirkley, Speaker of the Michigan House of Representatives Lee Chatfield, and other Michigan legislators in the Oval Office at the White House, and Trump made false accusations concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Michigan. Giuliani joined the meeting by telephone. This meeting was yeah. So like we read about this in the previous conspiracy as well. On on November 21st, Meadows sent a text message to the United States Representative Scott Perry from Pennsylvania and stated, "Can you send me the number for the Speaker and the leader of PA legislature? POTUS wants to chat with them." This is leading to like shaking them down. You know, he just needed their phone numbers. Well, that's why I imagine this is here. On November 22nd, Trump and Giuliani placed a telephone call to the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, Russell "Rusty" Bowers. During the telephone call, Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Arizona and solicited, requested, and importuned. I'm not familiar with this word. Importuned? I don't know. Bowers to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Arizona. Bowers declined and later testified to the United States House of Representatives Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol that he told Trump, "I would not break my oath." This is a little surprising that this is here for the Georgia case, but I guess it's to like demonstrate the like racketeering or whatever. So it's not necessarily Georgia specific. On November 25th, Giuliani and Ellis appeared, spoke, and presented witnesses at a meeting of Pennsylvania legislators in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. During the meeting, Giuliani made false statements, concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Pennsylvania and solicited, requested, importuned the Pennsylvania legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. During the meeting, Ellis solicited, requested, and importuned the Pennsylvania legislator present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. Trump joined the meeting by telephone and made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Pennsylvania and solicited, requested, importuned the Pennsylvania legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. There's so much redundancy. I swear. Are they just trying to pad their report? They said that, like, I get it's like each of these individuals did this separately, and they want to make that clear. Yeah, I understand why it's here. It's just one of those like you said this like 3 times. It's like just be like also Donald Trump, dude, same. You know, ditto. That thing he did it too. I know you can't do that. It's a legal case. You gotta be all proper. On November 25th, immediately after the meeting of Pennsylvania legislators in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, where Giuliani and Ellis appeared, spoke, and presented witnesses, Donald Trump invited a group of Pennsylvania legislators and others to meet with him at the White House. Later that day, Donald Trump, Mark Meadows, Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, and individual 5 and 6, who's met with the group of Pennsylvania legislators at the White House and discussed holding a special session of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. Some of this stuff we didn't know from the previous indictment. This maybe it was in the previous indictment, but I don't remember it being there. So we're learning some new stuff, and a lot of this is like these are small acts, but in the service of racketeer. Like, you know, it's like this. You did this, and you did this, and you like it's lots of little small things. Because if you don't include those, it's like, well, how, you know, it feels a lot more disconnected. But these are, you know, they're all, you know, there's lots of stuff that led up to these that went into these actions. It wasn't just like, oh, well, yeah, we just sent the electors. You know, you have to do a bunch of stuff to get there. On November 26th, Giuliani and Ellis placed a telephone call to Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Brian Cutler, and left Cutler a voicemail message for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and him to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. On November 26th, Giuliani placed a phone call to President pro tempore of the Pennsylvania Senate, Jake Corman, for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and, you know, Corman to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Pennsylvania. On November 27th, Giuliani and Ellis placed a telephone call to the Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Brian Cutler, and left Cutler a voicemail message for the purposes of doing the same. On November 27th, Giuliani, and this is just every day they're calling this guy. twice on the 26th, and now twice on the 10th. Man, they just look the blowing up this guy's phone. Look at this. Um, uh, Giuliani and Ellis placed a phone call to Jake Corman. Okay, you're comfortable shortening Jacob to Jake, but you can't short. All right, all right. This is just out to get me specifically. All right, they're punishing me for my decision to read this. Uh, they tried to solicit him again on the 27th. Trump placed a phone call to Jake Corman, trying to do the same thing. On the 28th, Giuliani placed a phone call to Brian Cutler and left a voicemail for doing the same thing. Man, they just would not stop. They're just like blowing up people's phones with this. I mean, I guess they were desperate because they weren't winning the election otherwise. Oh man, it's such a weird thing drinking a blue drink. It tastes a little like blue, but I think that's just because I'm thinking about the taste of blue as I'm drinking it. And I know people are like, blue's not a flavor. It is a little bit of a flavor. It's not, but a little bit. If someone says something tastes blue, that doesn't... I mean, they're wrong, but you kind of get what they're saying. And so, that's me. I'm wrong, but you understand me. I don't know why I said it like I'm a serial killer. On November 29th, Giuliani placed a telephone call to Brian Cutler and left him a voicemail trying to solicit him to send a false slate of electors. On November 30th, Giuliani and Ellis appeared, spoke, and presented witnesses at a meeting of Arizona legislators in Phoenix, Arizona. Individual 5 and Individual 6 were also present. During the meeting, Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Arizona and solicited the Arizona legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Arizona. During the meeting, Ellis solicited the Arizona legislators at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Arizona. Trump joined the meeting by telephone and made false statements concerning fraud in the presidential election in Georgia. I'm gonna look up the pronunciation. I keep skipping over this word because I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing it wrong.
Importune.
Importune. Okay. Importuned. We're gonna learn to harass someone persistently for or to do something. Okay. Well, now we learned a word. All right. We learned importuned. Importuned. On November 30th, Roman. Hey, we got a new person. Instructed Individual 7 who's to coordinate with individuals associated with the Trump campaign to contact state legislators in Georgia and elsewhere on behalf of Donald Trump to encourage them to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from their respective states. On or between the December 1st and December 31st, 2020, Trump and Meadows met with John McEntee, and requested that McEntee prepare a memorandum outlining a strategy for disrupting and delaying the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021, the day prescribed by law for counting votes cast by the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from Georgia and other states. The strategy included having Vice President Mike Pence. Why would you put... Okay. Count only half of the electoral votes from certain states, then return the remaining electoral votes to the state legislators. On December 1st, Giuliani and Ellis met with Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, Rusty Bowers, the President of the Arizona Senate, Karen Fann, and other Arizona legislators in Phoenix, Arizona. Individual 5 was also present. During the meeting, Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd presidential election in Arizona and requested, and importuned the legislators present to call a special session of the Arizona State Legislature. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm going to go.
Importune.
Importuned? It's such a weird word. Doesn't sit right in my brain. On December 7th, Giuliani and Ellis appeared, spoke, and presented witnesses at a meeting of the Michigan House of Representatives Oversight Committee. During the meeting, Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Michigan and solicited, requested, and importuned the Michigan legislators present at the meeting to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Michigan. During the meeting, Ellis did the same thing. On December 3rd, Trump uh, caused to be tweeted from the Twitter account. Oh, okay. They're saying caused to be tweeted because they can't be sure that he actually did the tweet, right? It could be someone else in his campaign who has access to his account. From what I can tell, Trump tweets on his own account, but you can't be sure. That's what they're saying, caused to be tweeted. Can't be sure it was actually him, but it's from his official, it's his Twitter account, a thing supposedly endorsed by him. Georgia hearings now on OANN. Amazing. Not really sure why that's an over further into the conspiracy, but all right, sure, whatever you say. I'm sure they have reasons for this, but they're just laying out the act. I think the entirety. Yeah, I think the entirety of this section is going to be those acts. I also lost my place now, but we should be able to find it. We were like 20 something. Well, we didn't see these. Yeah, okay, we're right here. On December 3rd, Giuliani, Eastman, Ellis, Smith committed the felony offense solicitation of violation of oath by public officer in violation of this statute in Fulton County, Georgia, by unlawfully soliciting, requesting, and importuning certain public officers then serving as elected members of the Georgia Senate and present at a state judiciary subcommittee meeting, including unindicted an individual 8 senators Lee Anderson, Brandon Beach, Matt Brass, Greg Dolezal, Steve Gooch. High school must have been rough. Tyler Harper, Bill Heath, Jen Jordan, John F. Kennedy. Probably not the same guy, right? I'm kidding, of course. William Liggett, Elena Parrott, Michael Rhett, Carden Summers, and Blake Tillery to engage in the conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of oath by public officer by unlawfully appointing presidential electors from Georgia in willful and intentional violation of the terms of the oath of said persons as prescribed by law, with the intent that said persons engaged in said conduct. So this is getting them to get the electors, and these are the people whose oaths were violated. Noteworthy is that the indictment doesn't say that they did this. I don't think that, I don't think anyone went along with this scheme. Just that they were solicited to do so. So it's not that these people did anything wrong necessarily. I mean, if any of them went along with it, then yes. But as far as I know, everyone that was asked to do this told them no. On December 3rd, Giuliani committed the felony offense of false statements and writings in violation of the statute in Fulton County, Georgia, by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements and representations to members of the Georgia Senate present at a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee meeting. If I slowed down, this would be easier, but if I slowed down, this would take way longer. Hopefully y'all can follow. If you can't, just scream at me in chat or something. Or just talk to me in chat at all. I'm so lonely. That at least 96,600 mail-in ballots were counted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia, despite there being no record of those ballots having been returned to a county elections office. Remember, we saw this in the previous indictment. And they knew it wasn't true. The Dominion voting systems equipment used in November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Antrim County, Michigan, mistakenly recorded 6,000 votes for Joseph Robinette Biden when the votes were actually cast for Donald John Trump. Why do they shorten Robinette but not John? I guess Robinette's a longer name. I don't know. But said statements being within the jurisdiction of the Office of the Georgia Secretary of State and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, departments and agencies of state government, and the county and city law and city law enforcement agencies. This was an act of racketeering activity under the statute and an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. I'm glad we read what the false statements and writing things was about, because now we understand why the indictment is pointing out the jurisdiction that these statements were made within, because it's, again, not illegal to lie. It's illegal to like lie basically to the government. At least that's my understanding of that statute. It is good tea though. On December 3rd, Smith committed the felony offense of false statements and writings. Oh, it seems like they're gonna lay out what all like maybe the charges aren't listed, but they're explaining what the crimes were and where they happened. And we're gonna see. It seems like multiple instances will be in one act of false statements of writing, if they're like, but maybe like different. Like, because this is multiple instances at once, but maybe some different instances at different times. I don't know, because there are a lot of instances of false statements in writing. So maybe only one person is ever charged with it, or only one charge per person, or maybe it's, it has to be distinct enough. I don't really know. Speculating here. On December 3rd, Smith committed the felony offense of false statements and writings in Fulton County, Georgia, by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements and representations to members of the Georgia Senate present at a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing. That 2,506 felons voted illegally in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. Something to note: we take this, I think, a lot for granted. Like, yeah, felons shouldn't vote, but like, why? Isn't the whole idea of once you're released from prison, like, okay, well, you've paid your debt to society? I don't like that phrasing, but that's the idea anyway. Like, why can't they vote? Do people think like felons will vote to make murder illegal? But it's also like, this also compounds some of the like, well, black neighborhoods are over policed, and like, there's a lot of drug charges that people get felony convictions for that are kind of bullshit. Well, now those people can't vote. It's like it's another mechanism of disenfranchisement. I know I'm like the billionth person to say this, but I just want to point that out to anyone who hasn't heard it before. Like, this is like subtly pernicious, this thing about felons not being able to vote anymore. By the way, that's also not ubiquitous. Some states have different rules regarding that. Some states you can apply to vote again, and then the governor, who's a racist or just like hates felons or whatever, will tell you no. But yeah, it's a little weird. There's a pretty good bit on Last Week Night with John Oliver about felony disenfranchisement, or felon disenfranchisement, excuse me. That 66,248 underage people illegally registered to vote before their 17th birthday prior to the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. That at least 2,423 people voted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia who were not listed as registered to vote. That 1,043 people voted in the election who had illegally registered to vote using a post office box. By the way, even if they had this particular instance, like even if they had illegally registered to vote using a post office box, like, is that like, if everything else was fine, this is kind of like a technicality to get the votes thrown out, as opposed to they're not actually allowed to, like, they shouldn't actually be voting, like people who are underage, or people who, well, according to the laws that currently exist, felons or whatever else, or people who are not registered. I mean, people who are not registered. Should we have automatic voter registration? We don't, but we should, shouldn't we? That 10,315 or more dead people voted in the presidential election of Georgia. That Fulton County election workers at State Farm Arena ordered poll watchers and members of the media to leave the tabulation area on the night of November 3rd and continue to operate after ordering everyone to leave. Said statements being within the jurisdiction of the Office of the Georgia Secretary of State, Bureau of Investigation, Department, and agency of the state government, and county. This is an act of racketeering, and now we're gonna skip the like racketeering part. It's gonna lay out what kind, like, why it's an act of racketeering by the statute. I'm not gonna look all of these up, right? Like, someone who knows the law can go look into that. Or if you're curious, you can literally just look up these statutes. We're not gonna do that. This is gonna take long enough as it is. I just want to know about what they are alleged to have done. On December 3rd, Trump caused to be tweeted from the Twitter account from his Twitter account. Wow, blockbuster testimony taking place right now in Georgia. Ballot stuffing by Dems when Republicans were forced to leave the large counting room. Plenty more coming, but this alone leads to an easy win of the state. This is also not true. Something to note about this one in particular is that if what he's saying is accurate about Republicans being forced to leave the room, how could you possibly know that there was ballot stuffing? By your own admission, you weren't there. Like no one saw it. By your own admission, you're like, it probably happened at that time that didn't exist, when we weren't in the room, even though we were. On December 3rd, Donald Trump caused to be tweeted from his Twitter account. People in Georgia got caught cold bringing in massive numbers of ballots and putting them in voting machines. A great job, Brian Kemp, Georgia. By the way, bringing in massive numbers of ballots and putting them in the putting in the voting machines. I don't know about like bringing in lots of ballots is like a thing you do at a tabulation room. That's what you're supposed to do, right? There's got to be a lot additional context for this, and also it's almost certainly untrue. On December 3rd, Trump met with Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Brian Coulter, in the Oval Office at the White House and discussed holding a special session of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. It's an act of conspiracy. And also note, he didn't care. Allegedly, there was this massive voter fraud in all these places, but only the swing states. There was no voter fraud. Weirdly, he didn't seem to think there was any voter fraud in states that he had won or states that he couldn't possibly win. It was only in states where it was possible that he might win, but hadn't yet. It's very curious how weirdly it's so strange how it didn't happen anywhere else. On December 3rd and on December 26th, Giuliani placed a telephone call to President. I like how he's making so many phone calls to these people that it's just like, screw it. Two of them at once. Yeah, these two, they're both the same. Even though the three phone calls on the same day were all considered different. Placed a phone call to President pro tempore of the Georgia Senate, Cecil Terrell Butch Miller, for the purpose of making false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. On December 3rd and December 26th, Trump placed a phone call to Butch Miller. Okay, he just made a phone call. Obviously, there's context to that, but it's so weird. It's weird, the amount of evidence they're not, or the amount of claims they're not putting in this indictment. Oh, a nice soothing tea for a nice rough read. On December 5th, Donald Trump placed a phone call to Brian Kemp and solicited him to call for a special session of the Georgia General Assembly. On December 6th, Trump caused to be tweeted from his Twitter account, "Gee, what a surprise. Has anyone informed the so-called says he has no power to do anything Governor Brian Kemp and his puppet Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan GA that they could easily solve this mess and win signature verification and call a special session. So easy." Link. What is this link? Okay, well, nothing to see here, and we lost our place. Cool. I think we're on page 27 or something. Oh no. We've read this one. Oh, okay, we were here. All right, Act 32. So it's kind of interesting, right? It's you're already starting to see a little bit of some of the story come up. Is he calls this guy? The guy almost certainly was like, "Yeah, I can't do that. Can't call a special session." And then the next day, Trump is tweeting about how he's a shill who's not doing anything and shaming him on social media, right? Which again isn't what you would do. None of this is what you would do if there were actual election fraud. On December 6th, Powell entered into a written engagement agreement with Sullivan Strickler LLC, a forensics data firm located in Fulton County, Georgia, for the performance of computer forensic collections and analytics on Dominion voting systems equipment in Michigan and elsewhere. The unlawful breach of election equipment in Coffee County, Georgia, was subsequently performed under this agreement. Interesting, but they had, okay, I guess the agreement was probably not to do that stuff. We don't know what the content of the agreement was. December 6th, Chile sent an email to Eastman and Individual 8 and Georgia Senator Brandon Beach, and that stated, "I'm working on setting up a call for you with the Speaker and the President pro tempore tomorrow. I am also making the leadership aware of the importance for Trump electors to meet on December 14th. Please provide the citation to the requirements of the duties which they must comply with." So what seems to be happening here is one saying like, oh, like it's important for you to get these Trump electors to go, even though Biden's electors were the ones who were supposed to meet. But also uh, like I need to get them up to speed on what they're supposed to do as electors or whatever, or what their requirements are. So like let me like kind of assuming that like yeah they should be doing what they're doing, even though they're very much not. It's weird. I can kind of select stuff. It just underlines certain words. I don't know. On December 6th, John Charles Eastman sent an email to Chile and Individual 8 and Brandon Beach that stated that Trump presidential election nominees in Georgia needed to meet on December 14th, 2020, sign 6 sets of certificates of vote, and mail them to the President of the Senate and to other officials. This is getting the false slate of electors to vote it's in the electoral college. On December 6th, Chile sent an email to Individual 2 that stated he had been speaking with Eastman and was attempting to set up a call with Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives David Ralston and President pro tempore of the Georgia Senate Butch Miller to encourage them to call a special session of the Georgia General Assembly. In the email, Chile stated Professor Eastman is Eastman a professor? Professor Eastman told me tonight that it is critical that the 16 electors for President Trump meet next Monday and vote in accordance with this statute. In the email, Chile further stated, "I assume you can make sure this happens." So now they're organizing, like, this is the reason why this is like, well, I'm gonna stop tripping over my words now. Seems like the reason why this is here is obviously like, okay, here's where they're trying to, this is where they're coordinating to have the false electors vote and whatever. We're gonna see a lot of that. On December 7th, Individual 2 sent an email to Chile and to Schaefer that stated, "Bob, can you get on call with David Schaefer, state GOP chair, and I later this morning to discuss?" This would be, it would be me, David Schaefer, and GOP chair. All right, we're gonna grammar check these bozos. David has been on top of a lot of efforts in the state. I get off of a board call around 10:30. On December 7th, Giuliani caused to be tweeted from his Twitter account the retweet of Individual 8, whose identity, okay, and that stated, "Georgia Patriot call to action. Today is the day we need you to call your state Senate and House reps and ask them to sign the petition for a special session. We must have free and fair elections in Georgia, and this is our only path to ensuring every legal vote is counted. At real Donald Trump." It's kind of funny because like you have unindicted conspirator individual numbers as like, okay, well, we're not going to talk about who they are. It's not really relevant, and like it hides their identity. Except you can determine whose tweet this was. The internet, like you can search that. I don't know. I'm not going to do that. I don't care. But you can find out who that person is. On December 7th, Eastman sent an email to Giuliani with an attached memorandum titled "The Real Deadline for Settling a State's Electoral Votes." The body of the email stated, "Here's the memo we discussed." The memorandum was written by Chesborough to James R. Troupis, an attorney associated with the Trump campaign, and advocates for the position that that Trump presidential elector nominees in Wisconsin should meet and cast electoral votes for Trump on December 14th, 2020, despite the fact that Donald Trump lost the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Wisconsin. On December 7th, Trump requested that Bill White, an individual associated with the Trump campaign, then residing in Fulton County, Georgia, provide him with certain information, including contact information for Majority Leader of the Georgia Senate, Mike Dugan, and the President pro tempore of the Georgia Senate, Butch Miller. The following day, White sent an email containing the requested information to Giuliani, Individual 5, and others. This request was an... Oh, okay. On December 7th, we have to skip so much. I'm like losing track of where we are. I'm like having trouble like actually figuring out what's being said here, but we're making our way through. We got this. We got this. We got this. On December 7th, Giuliani placed a telephone call to Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives David Ralston. Why do they have to put the full title every time? And discussed holding a special Senate of the Georgia General Assembly. On December 7th, Donald Trump committed the felony offense of solicitation of violation of oath by public officer in violation of the statute in Fulton County, Georgia, by unlawfully soliciting, requesting, and importuning Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives David Ralston, a public officer, to engage in constituting the felony offense of violation of oath by a public officer in the statute, by calling a special session of the Georgia General Assembly for the purpose of unlawfully appointing presidential electors from Georgia in willful and intentional violation of the terms of the oath of said person as prescribed by law, with the intent that said person engage in said conduct. On December 8th, Trump placed a telephone call to the Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr for the purpose of making false statements concerning the fraud in the presidential election. During that phone call, Trump asked Carr not to discourage other state attorneys general from joining a federal lawsuit filed by the state of Texas contesting the administration of the presidential election in Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Interesting. On December 8th, Trump and Eastman placed a telephone call to the Republican National Committee chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel, to request her assistance gathering certain individuals to meet and cast electoral votes for Trump on December 14th, 2020 in certain states, despite the fact that Trump lost the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in those states. On December 8th, 2020, Michael Roman sent a text message to Individual 4 that stated that he had spoken to Hampton and asked Individual 4 to get Hampton to attend the hearing before the Georgia House of Representatives Governmental Affairs Committee on December 10, 2020. On December 9th, Chesborough read a memorandum titled Statutory Requirements for December 14th Electoral Votes to James R. Troupis, an attorney associated with the Trump campaign. The memorandum provides detailed state-specific instructions on how Trump presidential elector nominees in Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin would meet and cast electoral votes for Trump on December 14, 2020, despite the fact that he lost the election in those states. We read a little bit about this in the previous indictment. This is a different way of approaching what was happening, but yeah, I think this was in the previous indictment as well. On December 10th, Chesborough sent an email to Georgia Republican Party Chairman Schaefer and Individual 9. Chesborough stated in the email that certain individuals associated with the Trump campaign asked him to help coordinate with the other 5 contested states to help with the logistics of electors in other states, hopefully joining and casting their votes on Monday. On December 10th, Chesborough sent an email with attached documents to Schaefer and individuals 9, 10, and 11. The documents were to be used by Trump presidential elector nominees in Georgia for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Trump, despite the fact that he lost. On December 10th, Chesborough sent an email with the attached documents to the Arizona Republican Party Executive Director Greg Saf Safsten Safsten and others. The documents were to be used by Trump presidential elector nominees in Arizona for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Trump, despite the fact they lost in that state. I feel like we're gonna get it. Yeah. All right. We get Chesbrough sent an email to Wisconsin Chairman Brian Schimming with for the same thing in Wisconsin on December 10th. Sent it to Nevada. Okay, we did the same thing in Nevada. Uh, on December 10th, Chesbrough sent an email attached documents to. Well, I'm not Jim de Graffenried. These documents were to be used by presidential elector nominees in Nevada for the purpose of casting electoral votes. On December 10th, sent an email to same thing in Pennsylvania. Oh, what a name! Thomas W. King III. Okay, I wasn't as long as I thought it was. I thought it was more than that, but still. On December 10th, Schaefer contacted individual 2 by telephone and discussed individual 2's attendance at the December 14, 2020 meeting of Trump presidential elector nominees in Fulton County, Georgia. On December 10th, Giuliani and Smith committed the felony offense of solicitation of violation of oath by a public officer by unlawfully soliciting certain public officers then serving as elected members of the Georgia House of Representatives and present at the House Governmental Affairs Committee meeting, including Representatives Shaw Blackman, John Burns, Barry Fleming, Todd Jones, Bean Wynn, Mary Margaret Oliver, Alan Powell, Renita Shannon, Robert Tremmel, Scott Turner, and Bruce Williamson to engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of public oath and trying to get them to do it. It was like the short version is try to get them to do a thing that would be a violation of the oath with the intent of getting them to do the thing that would be illegal. On December 10th, Giuliani committed felony offense of false statements and writings in Fulton County. Okay, so Giuliani's getting multiple of these false statements and writings for multiple instances of this. I guess it's just these all happen in the same day, so they're getting wrapped together, I guess. By willingly making at least one of the following false statements and representations to members of the Georgia House of Representatives present at a House Governmental Affairs Committee meeting. That is quite clear from the State Farm Arena video on November 3rd, 2020, that Fulton County election workers were stealing votes and that Georgia officials were covering up a crime in plain sight. Remember, we saw this in previous indictment. That at State Farm Arena on November 3rd, Democratic officials got rid of all the reporters and observers, anyone that couldn't be trusted, used the excuse of a water main break, cleared out the voting area, and then went about their duty, crooked business. Again, if the first part is true, you cannot possibly know that the second part is true. You weren't there. Also, I'm sure none of it's true. That between 12,000 and 24,000 ballots were illegally counted in Fulton County election workers at State Farm Arena on November 3rd, 2020. Notice how the numbers are just varying wildly. That in Michigan, there were 700,000 more ballots counted than were sent out to voters in the presidential election, which was accounted for by quadruple counting ballots. That Ruby Freeman, Shay Moss, and an unidentified man were quite obviously surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine at the State Farm Arena to be used to infiltrate the crooked Dominion voting machines. That 96,600 mail-in ballots were counted in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia, despite there being no record of those ballots having been returned to a county elections office. This is the same claim he made previously, but I guess this is another instance where he did it. And now it's the jurisdiction and why that's not like why it's making false statements and writings to this jurisdiction, not just lying in general. On December 11th, Schaefer reserved room 216 at the Georgia State Capitol in Fulton County, Georgia, for the December 14, 2020 meeting of Trump presidential elector nominees in Fulton County, Georgia. I was like, wait, he reserved a room? That's like that's the problem? Oh no, but it was for the purpose of these false electors to meet. Okay, got it. On December 11th, Chesborough sent an email to Jim de Graffenried. I was hoping that it was the last time I was going to have to attempt that name. It wasn't. And stated that the purpose of having the electoral votes sent into Congress is to provide the opportunity to debate the election irregularities in Congress and to keep alive the possibility that the votes could be flipped to Trump. Something I want to remind you is that like they were creating the irregularities by sending the separate slates of electors, right? Like it's like so they could debate the irregularities that we're making by doing this. There wouldn't be irregularities if you weren't going out of your way to create them. On December 11th, Chesborough sent an email with attached documents to Greg Staffsten and others. The documents were to be used by Trump presidential elector nominees in Arizona for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Trump, despite the fact he lost. I thought we had finished with this portion. Would they sell that? All right, well. On December 11th, Chesborough sent an email to Roman and other individuals associated with the Trump campaign. The documents were to be used in Nevada for the casting electoral votes for Trump, even though he lost. On December 11th, Chesborough sent an email with attached documents to Roman and individual 5. The documents were to be used by Trump elector nominees in Georgia for the purpose of voting for Trump, even though he lost. On December 12th, Schaefer contacted individual 12 and discussed individual 12's attendance at the December 14th, 2020 meeting of Trump presidential elector nominees in Fulton County, Georgia. I wonder if this person is one of the people that they were trying to get. Like, I wonder if this was supposed to be one of the Trump electors in that fictitious slate of electors, and that, or like, that's why they're just like asking if they're going, trying to get them to go to this meeting. Whew. All right, we're still going. On December 12th, Roman sent an email to individual 4 and individual 7 and other individuals associated with the Trump campaign. In the email, Roman stated, "I need a tracker for the electors," and instructed individuals associated with the Trump campaign to populate entries on a shared spreadsheet listing Trump presidential elector nominees in Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The entries on the spreadsheet included contact information for the Trump presidential elector nominees, whether the Trump presidential elector nominees had been contacted, and whether the Trump presidential elector nominees had confirmed that they would attend the December 14, 2020 meetings of Trump presidential elector nominees in their respective states, despite the fact that Donald Trump lost the election in those states. On December 12th, Chesborough met with Brian Schimming and discussed the December 14, 2020 meeting of Trump presidential electors in Wisconsin. Giuliani joined the meeting by telephone and stated that the media should not be notified of, that's not suspicious at all. Should not be notified about the meeting in Wisconsin. Yeah, it's pretty suspicious that you're like, yeah, like, we're allowed to do this, and it's the right thing to do because the election was stolen, but don't tell anybody? Yeah, you had to know you were up to no good at that point, right? On December 12th, Roman instructed an individual associated with the Trump campaign to distribute certain information related to the December 14th meeting in Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin to individual 4 and to other individuals associated with the Trump campaign. On December 12th, individual 4 sent an email to Roman and Schaefer with updates on the progress of organizing the December 14th meeting in Georgia. The email stated with which elector nominees had confirmed they would attend the meeting, and that other individuals had been secured in case some of the elector nominees refused to participate in the meeting. Another thing that's really telling is that they're planning for people to refuse to do this thing that they obviously shouldn't be doing. I don't know. It just feels noteworthy. Like, when you're like, yeah, of course they refuse because this is illegal. Yeah, we got to have a contingency for when they don't want to do the illegal thing. The Georgia legislators had been contacted to ensure access to the Georgia Capitol, and that Schaefer had reserved 216 for the meeting. On December 12th, Schaefer sent an email to individual 4 advising them to touch base with each of the Trump presidential elector nominees in Georgia in advance of the 2014 of the December 14th meeting to confirm their attendance. Are we gonna get like every act that has to do with like organizing a meeting of these people? Oh my! On December 12th, individual 4 sent a text message with contact information for individual 8 and Georgia Senator Brandon Beach to Roman for the purpose of providing the contact information to Giuliani. On December 13th, Chesborough sent an email with attached documents to Roman. The documents were to be used by presidential electors in New Mexico for the purpose uh, of casting electoral votes for Trump, even though he lost. On December 13th, Chesborough sent an email to Giuliani with the subject "Privileged and Confidential: Brief Notes on President of Senate Strategy." In the email, Chesborough outlined multiple strategies for disrupting and delaying the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021, the day prescribed by law for counting votes cast by the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from Georgia and the other states. In the email, Chesborough stated that the strategies outlined by him were preferable to allowing the Electoral Count Act to operate by its terms. Yeah, so like again, a reminder from the previous indictment, they were trying to disrupt this process, and they knew that that's what they were trying to do. They were overt about it. They were strategizing like, how do we get this to not happen the way it's supposed to? Not how do we solve a fraud problem, which there wasn't. It was how do we disrupt the process? On December 13th, Chesborough sent an email with attached documents to Roman and individual 4. The documents were to be used by presidential elector nominees in Georgia for the purpose of casting electoral votes for Trump, even though he lost. On December 13th, Chesborough sent an email to Rowan and individual 4 and stated that Giuliani wants to keep this quiet until after all the voting is done, in reference to the December 14th meeting of Trump presidential elector nominees in Georgia. Again, like, keeping it all quiet is pretty suspicious, Giuliani. On December 13th, Schaefer sent a text message to individual 4 and stated that individual 8 who would attend the December 14th meeting in Georgia in the place of a Trump presidential elector nominee who refused to participate in the meeting. Yeah, so it seems like some of these people are electors or the false slaves of electors, and someone was like, "Nope, not doing it because that's not legal." And so this person's like, "I'll do it. It's fine." On December 13th, individual 9 sent a text message to Schaefer and confirmed that he and individual 13 would attend the December 14th meeting. On December 14th, Trump caused to be tweeted from his account, "What a fool Governor Brian Kemp, GA of Georgia is. Could have been so easy, but now we have to do it the hard way." Yeah, again, like it sounds exactly like a like stereotypical mob boss. "Demand this clown call a special election and open up signature verification now. Otherwise, could be a bad day for two great senators on January 5th." Yeah, it sounds like an open threat. What the hell is this? Do it or else, and like very vague as to what the or else is. For real, like I don't understand how this isn't literally a threat that is like that making threats are illegal. Like I don't know how this isn't that. At least that's my understanding. Is threatening people not illegal? I thought it was. I don't know. On December 14th, Schaefer sent a text message to individual 4 that stated, "Listen, tell them to go straight to room 216 to avoid drawing attention to what we are doing," in reference to the December 14th meeting. On December 14th, Roman sent an email to individual 4 and individual 7 and stated, "Please send me an update as soon as the state electoral college has adjourned and all the paperwork is secured." On December 14th, Smith and Schaefer encouraged certain individuals present at the December 14th meeting to sign the document titled Certificate of the Votes of the 2020 Electors from Georgia. Reminder that this is the false slate of electors. They should not be doing this. They're not allowed to do this. On December 14th, Schaefer, Still, Latham, and individuals 2, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 committed the felony offense of impersonating a public officer. Yeah, by pretending to be electors. Yeah, that makes sense. By unlawfully, falsely holding themselves out to be duly elected and qualified presidential electors from the state of Georgia, public officers with the intent to mislead the President of the United States Senate, the Archivist of the United States, and the Georgia Secretary of State, and the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, into believing they were actually such officers by placing in the United States mail to send persons a document titled Certificate of the Votes of the 2020 Electors from Georgia. This should be pretty self-explanatory, but I didn't that wouldn't come to my mind as like, oh yeah, that's a crime. But yeah, obviously that's a crime. Yeah, you can't impersonate a public officer. Um, on December 14th, Schaefer, Still, Latham, co-conspirators, individuals 2, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 committed the felony offense of forgery in the first degree uh, with the intent to defraud, knowingly making a document titled Certificate of the Votes of the 2020 Electors from Georgia, a writing other than a check in such manners that... Oh, okay, interesting. That's different than... I guess that's like a check fraud, I guess. In such manners that the writing as made purports to have been made by the authority of the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from the state of Georgia, who did not give such authority and uttered and delivered said documents to the Archivist of the United States. This is a racketeering activity and an overt act in the conspiracy. Okay, seeing as though the different charges are coming up in these acts, I actually wouldn't be surprised if the entire thing is remaining as acts, which means we can stop basically whenever we feel like we've had enough. I'll try to make it to the halfway point, which is about 49 pages, but we'll see. Or, I can also go until my usual ending time, like between 4 and 4:30. So uh, we got a little bit of a leeway there. Remember, this is really long, so like cutting up into pieces is going to be helpful. On December 14th, Schaefer, Still, Latham, and individuals 2, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 committed the felony offense of false statements in writing by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making and using a false document titled Certificate of the Votes of the 2020 Electors from Georgia, with knowledge that said document contained the false statement, we, the undersigned, being the duly elected and qualified electors for President and Vice President of the United States of America from the state of Georgia, do hereby certify the following: said document being within the jurisdiction, yada yada, etc. So yeah, like it's interesting to me like how many laws this one document violated. In producing this one document violated. It's not just illegal; it's like 4, 5, 6 times illegal. It's mega illegal, super illegal. This isn't even its final form of illegality. All right, we're moving on from the bad jokes. On December 14th, Schaefer, Still, Latham, in individuals 2, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 attempted to commit the felony offense of filing false documents in violation of this by placing in the United States mail a document signed titled Certificate of the Votes of the 2020 Electors from Georgia, addressed to the Chief Judge, U.S. District Court, Northern District of Georgia, 2188 Richard D. Russell Federal Office Building in U.S. Courthouse, 75 Ted Turner Drive, Southwest Alpha. I don't know why the whole address is here. With the intent to knowingly file, enter, and record said document in a court of the United States, having reason to know that the said document contained materially false statements. The materially false statement, we the undersigned, being the duly elected and qualified electors for President and Vice President of the United States of America from the state of Georgia, do hereby certify the following. On December 14th, Schaefer and Still committed the felony offense of forgery in the first degree with the intent to defraud, knowingly making a document titled Notice of Filing Electoral College Vacancy, a writing and other than a check in such manner that the writing as made purports to have been made by the authority of the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from the state of Georgia, who did not give any such authority, and uttered and delivered said document to the Archivist of the United States. On December 14th, Schaefer still committed the felony offense of false statements and writings by doing the same thing. Right? It's like we're gonna get a bunch of. We're probably gonna have the same document come up a bunch. Yeah. On December 14th, Schaefer instructed Individual 15 to deliver to the office of the Governor of Georgia a document signed by Schaefer and Still titled. That's the same document. On December 14th, Individual 4 sent an email to Roman Individual and Individual 7. Oh no. Oh, sorry. To Roman Individual 7 and others. Jeez. That stated, all votes cast, paperwork complete, being mailed now, ran pretty smoothly, in reference to the December 14th meeting of Trump presidential elector nominees in Fulton County, Georgia. On December 14th, Lee attempted to commit the felony offense of influencing witnesses by traveling to the home of Ruby Freeman, a Fulton County Georgia election worker, and speaking to her neighbor with the intent to knowingly engage in misleading conduct toward Ruby Freeman by purporting to offer help and with the intent to influence her testimony in official proceeding in Fulton County, Georgia, concerning events at State Farm Arena in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. Yeah, this should have been obvious to them that, like, yeah, you can't just, like, go to someone's house who's in a trial to be like, hey, listen, maybe you should change your testimony a little bit, eh? Maybe it should be different than what it's gonna be. Yeah, like, witness tampering is one of those, like, very obvious crimes. On December 15th, Lee attempted to commit the felony offense of influencing witnesses by traveling to the home of Ruby Freeman. Oh, okay, he did this 2 days in a row. Just did the same thing on the 15th as well. On December 15th, so between December 15th and January 4th, Lee solicited Floyd, an individual associated with the organization Black Voices for Trump, to assist with his efforts to speak to Ruby Freeman, a Fulton County, Georgia election worker. Lee stated to Floyd that Freeman was afraid to talk to Lee because he was a white man, or maybe because you're trying to, like, get her to change her votes and her life has been turned upside down by the mania that was inspired by Trump Trump fanatics. Jeez. On December 18th, Trump met with Giuliani, Powell, and Individual 20 and others at the White House. The individuals present at the meeting discussed certain strategies and theories intended to influence the outcome of the November 3rd election, including seizing voting equipment and appointing Powell as special counsel with broad authority to investigate allegations of voter fraud in Georgia and elsewhere. On December 21st, Powell sent an email to the chief operations officer of Sullivan Strickler LLC and instructed him that she and individual 6, 21, and 22 were to immediately receive a copy of all data obtained by Sullivan Strickler LLC from Dominion Voting Systems Equipment in Michigan. On December 22nd, Meadows traveled to the Cobb County Civic Center in Cobb County, Georgia, and attempted to observe the signature match audit being performed there by law enforcement officers from the Georgia Bureau of Investigations and the Office of the Georgia Secretary of State, despite the fact that the audit process was not open to the public. While present at the center, Meadows spoke to Georgia Deputy Secretary of State Jordan Fuchs? I don't know. Is it Jordan Fox? I don't know. Officer of the Georgia Secretary of State Chief Investigator Francis Watson, Georgia Bureau of Investigation Special Agent in charge Baham Rich, and others who prevented Meadows from entering into the space where the audit was being conducted. On December 23rd, Trump placed a telephone call to should be the office of the Georgia Secretary of State Chief Investigator Francis Watson that had been previously arranged by Meadows. During the phone call, Trump falsely stated that he had won the November 3rd election in Georgia by hundreds of thousands of votes and stated to Watson that when the right answer comes to you, you'll be praised. When the right answer comes out, you'll be praised. Jesus. On December 23rd, Eastman sent an email to Chesborough and Individual 3, with the subject "Forward Draft 2 with Edits." In the email, Eastman attached a memorandum titled "Privileged and Confidential, December 23rd Memo on January 6th, Scenario Doc X." Doc X, I suppose, and stated, As for hearings, I think both are unnecessary. The fact that we have multiple slates of electors demonstrates the uncertainty of either. Yeah, you see what I mean? Like, they were creating the uncertainty by sending the separate sets of electors and just being like, well, guess we can't know now because, there are two slates of electors, so I guess you gotta just throw them both at, like, this isn't like, but both are the justification for the other, is what I mean. The obvious fraud is, well, it's obvious. That should be enough. And I agree with Ken that Judiciary Committee hearings on the constitutionality of the Electoral Count Act could invite counter views that we do not believe should constrain Pence or Grassley in the exercise of power they have under the 12th Amendment. Better for them to just act boldly and be challenged, since the challenge would likely lead to the court denying review of the non-justiciable political question grounds. Denying to review on non-justiciable political question grounds. Wow, that's crazy. Okay, so if I'm understanding this correctly, just be like, yeah, be bold because the courts won't be able to rule on this, and so you'll just get away with it, even though like he knows there should be. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, it seems like he's like I knows what he's doing isn't okay, but what are they gonna do about it? On December 25th, Trump placed a telephone call to Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives Rusty Bowers for the purpose of soliciting, requesting, and importuning Bowers to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Arizona. During the call, Bowers stated to Trump, "I voted for you, I worked for you, I campaigned for you, I just won't do anything illegal for you." On December 27th, Meadows sent a text message to Office of the Georgia Secretary of State Chief Investigator Francis Watson that stated in part, "Is there any way to speed up Fulton County signature verification in order to have the results before January 6th if the Trump campaign assist financially?" Wow, all right. So like, hey, give us, maybe shoot you some money and you get it done a little quicker, God damn. It's only barely not a bribe, right? On December 27th, Trump solicited acting United States Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and acting United States Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue to make false statements by stating, "Just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." On December 28th, Clark attempted to commit the felony offense of false statements and writings in violation of this whatever by knowingly and willfully making false writings and documents, knowing the same to contain the false statements that the United States Department of Justice had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states, including the state of Georgia. The said statement being made within the jurisdiction, etc. And on December 28th, Clark sent an email to acting United States Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and acting United States Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue and requested, what is this random G doing in Donahue? Anyway, um, and requested authorization to send said false state writings and documents to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives David Ralston, and President Pro Tempore of the Georgia Senate, Butch Miller, which constitutes a substantial step towards the commission of false statements and writings, so on and so forth. On December 28th, Clark solicited acting United States Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and acting United States Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue to sign and send a document that falsely stated that the United States Department of Justice had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states, including the state of Georgia, to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives David Ralston, and President Pro Tempore of the Georgia Senate Butch Miller. Whew. We're making good progress through this. I think skipping this huge amount of text that's just duplicate is helping out a lot. On December 30th, Trump caused to be tweeted from his Twitter account, "Hearings from Atlanta on the Georgia election overturned now being broadcast. Check it out. OANN, Newsmax, and many more. Brian Kemp GA should resign from office. He is an obstructionist who refuses to admit that we won Georgia big. Also won the other swing states." Okay, sure. Yeah, just like things didn't go well with Brian Kemp, who keeps trying to get to work with him. As soon as they don't, he's like sending his fans after it. Like he's turning to the public of like, this guy's not breaking the law for us. Get him. On December 30th, Trump caused to be tweeted from his Twitter account, "Hearings from Atlanta on the Georgia election overturned now being broadcast live via RSB network." And there's a link. There was an overt act was an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. It is kind of funny to me that they have these like embedded links in the indictment. Like someone's gonna type this into. It's like, first of all, they don't work, but also like someone's gonna type this into. I know technically it's part of the tweet, even though the links are dead now. But like, oh man, it's just very funny to me. On December 30th, Giuliani, Smith, Chile committed the felony offense of solicitation of violation of oath by public officer by soliciting, requesting, and importuning certain public officers then serving as elected members of the Georgia Senate and present at the State Judiciary Subcommittee hearing, including individual 8 Senators Brandon Beach, Bill Heath, William Ligon, Michael Rhett, and Blake Tillery. Okay, so apparently individual 8 is also, it was like a elected representative in Georgia. Interesting. To engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of oath by public officer by unlawfully appointing presidential electors from the state of Georgia in willful and intentional violation of the terms of the oath, so on and so forth. It seems then that individual 8 actually went along with it, and that's why they're an unindicted co-conspirator, as opposed to just a named person who was solicited but didn't participate. Which makes me think any of the people listed here by name probably didn't go along with it, with the scheme here. We're on Act 103. Jeez. On December 30th, Giuliani committed the felony offense of false statements and writings by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following statements and representations to members of the Georgia Senate present at a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing. that Fulton County election workers fraudulently counted certain ballots as many as 5 times in State Farm Arena on November 3rd, that 2,560 felons voted illegally in the presidential election. At least that number is the same. That 10,315 dead people voted. Yeah, I think that number is also the same. Said statements. All right. Yeah, the jurisdiction. Sure. On December 30th, Smith committed the felony offense of false statements and writings in violation by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements and representations to members of the Georgia Senate present at a state judiciary subcommittee hearing. The Georgia Secretary of State General Counsel Ryan Germany stated that his office had sent letters to 8,000 people who voted illegally in the November 3rd election and told them not to vote in the January 5th, 2021 runoff election. That the Georgia Secretary of State admitted that they had a 90% accuracy rate in the November 3rd presidential election, and that there's still a 10% margin that's not accurate. At this point, it should be obvious that these things are false. That's why they're here, right? If these weren't demonstrably false, they wouldn't be charged with making these false statements. Though I did prefer that I did like that the previous indictment made clear why these things weren't true and why the people making them knew that they weren't true. I feel like that was helpful. Obviously an indictment's job isn't to lay everything out for us reading it on my little dinky little live stream here. But it was helpful, like as a bonus that it laid that out. On December 30th, Chile committed the felony offense of false statements and writings by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the false statements and representations to members of the Georgia Senate present at a Senate Judiciary Subcommittee hearing. That poll watchers and media at State Farm Arena were told late in the evening of November 3rd that the vote count was being suspended until the next morning and to go home because of a major water main break. That Fulton County election workers at State Farm Arena voted the same ballots over and over again on November 3rd. On December 30th, Trump caused to be tweeted from his Twitter account, "We now have far more votes than needed to flip Georgia in the presidential race. Massive voter fraud took place. Thank you to the Georgia legislature for today's revealing meeting." Yeah, it's kind of wild that he's saying this when like no one's in agreement with it. Like there was the meeting at the Georgia legislature where his team lied to the Senate. They didn't go along with it because it was nonsense, and then he's like, "Look, we have proof because we said it again." On December 31st, Ellis wrote a memorandum titled "Memorandum Re Constitutional Analysis of Vice President Authority for January 6, 2021 Electoral College Vote Count." To Trump, the memorandum outlined a strategy for disrupting and delaying the joint session of Congress on January 6th, the day prescribed by law for counting votes cast by the duly elected and qualified presidential electors from Georgia and the other states, and stated, "The vice president should therefore not open any of the votes from 6 slates, including Georgia, that were falsely characterized as having electoral delegates in dispute." On December 31st, Trump and Eastman committed the felony offense of filing false documents by knowingly filing a document titled "Verified Complaint for Emergency Injunctive and Declaratory Relief in the matter of Trump v. Kemp case in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, a court of the United States having reason to know that said document contained at least one of the following materially false statements: that as many as 2,506 felons with uncompleted sentence voted illegally in the election, that at least 66,247 underage people voted illegally in the November 3rd presidential election, that at least 2,423 individuals voted illegally in the election in Georgia who were not listed in the state's records as having been registered to vote, that at least 1,403 individuals voted illegally in the November 3rd election who had illegally registered to vote using a postal office box as their habitation. That as many as 10,315 or more dead people voted in the election. That deliberate misinformation was used to instruct Republican poll watchers and members of the press to leave the premises for the night at approximately 10 p.m. on November 3rd at State Farm Arena in Fulton County, Georgia. Earlier on the same day, Eastman sent an email to attorneys associated with the Trump campaign admitting his knowledge that at least some of the allegations in the verified complaint were not accurate. Yeah, I'm glad. Okay, I'm very glad that was included because like it seemed really weird, but Eastman knew that these things weren't true, but he was still filing lawsuits about it. Yeah, all right. Well, that's filing false documents, right? I guess that's what that. I guess there might be some like legal argument there as to why it might not be. I can imagine what that would look like, but the point is, well, he knew it wasn't true. On January 1st, Chesborough sent an email to Eastman and Individual 3. In the email, Chesborough outlined a strategy for disrupting and delaying the joint session of Congress on January 6th. Yeah, they just go into detail about literally everything over and over again. So I'm like, is there more in the sentence? Nope, not really. We can skip the rest of it because we know what January 6th is. On January 2nd, Hall, a Georgia bail bondsman, placed a telephone call to Clark and discussed the November 3rd election in Georgia. The telephone call was 63 minutes in duration. Okay. I'm guessing the contents of that call is what's relevant. On January 2nd, Clark solicited acting United States Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen and acting United States Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue to sign and send a document that falsely stated that the United States Department of Justice had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the elections in multiple states, including the state of Georgia, to Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, Speaker of the Georgia House of Representatives David Ralston, and President pro tempore of the Georgia Senate Butch Miller. As we remember from the previous indictment, they knew this wasn't true, and they were like kind of coerced into this, I think. But yeah, we can proceed. On January 2nd, Donald Trump and Mark Meadows committed the felony offense of solicitation of violation of oath by a public officer by unlawfully soliciting, requesting, and importuning Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a public officer, to engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of oath of public office by unlawfully altering, unlawfully adjusting, and otherwise unlawfully influencing the certified returns for presidential electors for November 3rd, presidential election in Georgia, and willfully, so on and so forth. Like getting them to do the thing that with the intention of getting them to violate their oath. Something to note about this that I think is pretty telling, but in a cool way, that, a lot of times people act like our elected officials are just elected kings, but at least in theory, the idea behind a democracy in this sense is that the elected representatives are just as much subject to the law as anyone else. And there are laws regarding what they are and are not allowed to do. And we're seeing that happen here. Like, Trump just wanted to be like, well, listen, you're in power, you can just do what you want. But no, Meadows can't. That would be illegal. And trying to get him to do this is also illegal. And now we're seeing being held to account. Now in practice, this doesn't happen nearly enough. Elected officials get away with a lot of crime, a lot of stuff all the time, just constantly. But it's kind of telling you that there at the very least is in theory something preventing this, and people are making that effort. Now if he just did it, who knows what would have happened. But I don't know, just something that occurred to me as we were reading this is, a cool thing about democracy is that no, it's not just a king that you elected who can do whatever. They have enumerated powers. At least that's the idea. Can't just do whatever you want. On January 2nd, Trump committed the felony offense of false statements and writings by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following statements and representations to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, Georgia Deputy, I keep saying deputary, I'm combining the words, Georgia Deputy Secretary of State Jordan Futch, and Georgia's Secretary of State, General Counsel Ryan Germany, that anywhere from 250,000 to 300,000 ballots were dropped mysteriously into the rolls in the November 3rd presidential election in Georgia. No, like just a completely new invented claim out of no like completely new number because like well we need to win by hundreds of thousands of votes I guess, and like that like a few thousand was relevant before and now the number is bigger. Yeah. The thousands of people attempted to vote in the election and were told that they could not because the ballot had already been cast in their name. That 4,502 people voted in the election who were not on the voter registration list. Notice that that number is also very different now. That 904 people voted in the November 3rd election uh, who were registered at an address that was a post office box. And again, a new different number. That Ruby Freeman was a professional vote scammer and a known political operative. Again, just ruining this woman's life for existing at the place where she's supposed to do her job. That Ruby Freeman, her daughter, and others were responsible for fraudulently awarding at least 18,000 ballots to Biden at the State Farm Arena on November 3rd. That close to 5,000 dead people voted in the presidential election. That 139% of people voted in the presidential election in Detroit. That 200,000 more votes were recorded than the number of people who voted in Pennsylvania. That thousands of dead people voted in Michigan. That Ruby Freeman stuffed the ballot boxes. Notice the original claim was like, what did we see? Some ambiguous footage of like maybe people handing things to other people. That was the original footage. Then it was, oh, they're passing around USB drives. Now she's a professional vote scammer. Like that's a thing. Like that's a thing that can be, or that is, and that she's personally stuffing ballot boxes. And like the escalations of these claims based on this is kind of the same thing we saw with like aliens in Area 51. What's actually the case? People found some sticks and tinfoil in the desert. Now we're like they found a full spacecraft and there were aliens and they're alive today and they're walking amongst it. It's just like these escalation of claims is ridiculous. I mean, it's another thing that like happens with conspiracies because you don't need evidence when you're making all of it up. So like it keeps feeling more impactful in your head. So you just like exaggerate more and more what's actually happening. And what actually happened was nothing. That hundreds of thousands of ballots had been dumped into Fulton County and another county adjacent to Fulton County in the election in Georgia. That he won the election by 400,000 votes. Notice the claim is more and more extreme. It was like before it was listen, like I probably won by a little bit. Now it's no, I won by almost 500,000 votes. On January 3rd, Trump caused to be tweeted from his account. I spoke to Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger yesterday about Fulton County and voter fraud in Georgia. He was unwilling or unable to answer questions such as the ballots under the table scam, ballot destruction, out-of-state voters, dead voters, and more. He has no clue. On January 3rd, Lee, Floyd, and Cuddy placed multiple telephone calls and sent text messages to each other and to other individuals involved in the conspiracy. They include the following. At 7:48 p.m., Floyd placed a telephone call to Ruby Freeman. That was unsuccessful. Jesus. Now they're calling these people. At 7:49, he placed another. Jeez, he's blowing up her phone on 7 at 7. That was he called her again. And it was unsuccessful. At 7:49, Floyd placed a telephone call to Cuddy. At 7:53, Floyd sent a text message to Ruby Freeman. At 8:03, Cuddy placed a telephone call to Floyd. At 8:11, Floyd placed a telephone call to individual 23. At 8:18, Floyd placed a telephone call to Lee. At 8:48, Floyd placed a telephone call to Cuddy. At 9:16, Floyd placed a telephone call to Cuddy. At 9:33, Floyd placed a telephone call to Cuddy. At 9:50, Floyd placed a telephone call to Lee. Jeez, what are the like all these phone calls? Jesus. It's just a lot. It's just a lot, is what I'm saying. On January 4th, Cuddy, having been recruited by Floyd, travels from Chicago to Atlanta and caused a certain individual whose identity is known to the grand jury to pick her up from a train station in Fulton County, Georgia, for the purpose of attempting to contact Ruby Freeman. Again, on January 4th, Cuddy traveled to Ruby Freeman's home in Cobb County and attempted to contact her but was unsuccessful. Cuddy spoke with Freeman's neighbor and falsely stated that she was a crisis manager attempting to help Freeman before leaving Freeman's home. I thought, oh, you were doing this again. Oh, Jesus. Yeah, I was like, didn't people already try to contact her? Oh, this is another instance of it. And traveling like halfway across the country to do it, no less. On January 4th, Cuddy, while in Fulton County, placed a telephone call to Ruby Freeman and stated that Freeman was in danger. Cuddy stated that she could help Freeman by and requested that Freeman meet with and speak to her that night at a Cobb County Police Department precinct in Cobb County, Georgia. On January 2021, excuse me, on January 4th, Cuddy traveled to Cobb County Police Department precinct in Cobb County, Georgia, and met with and spoke to Ruby Freeman for approximately 1 hour. Floyd joined the meeting by telephone. Cuddy and Floyd stated to Freeman that she needed protection and purported to offer her help. On January 4th, Lee, Floyd, Cuddy committed the felony offense of solicitation of false statements and writings by soliciting, requesting, and importuning Ruby Freeman, a Fulton County, Georgia election worker, to engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of false statements and writings by knowingly and willfully making false statements and representations concerning events at State Farm Arena in the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election in Georgia. Said statement and representation, so on and so forth. On January 4th, Lee, Floyd, and Cuddy committed the felony offense of influencing witnesses in Fulton County, Georgia, by knowingly and unlawfully engaging in misleading conduct towards Ruby Freeman, a Fulton County, Georgia election worker, by stating that she needed protection and purporting to offer her help with the intent to influence her testimony in an official proceeding in Fulton County, Georgia, concerning events at State Farm Arena in the presidential election. One thing that's weird to me, maybe I missed it, is the connection between Lee, Floyd, Cuddy, and like these three are clearly connected. How are they connected to like Trump and all them? Or are these just like they seem like they're just like overzealous fanatics, Trump fanatics, but not necessarily part of this organization? Maybe I missed that. On January 4th, Lee, Floyd, and Cuddy placed multiple telephone calls and text messages to each other and to other individuals involved in the conspiracy. They include the following. At 9:41, Lee placed a telephone call to Floyd. At 11, that's a.m. At 11:24 a.m., Floyd placed a call to Schaefer. Oh, okay. Well, there's the connection. At 12:25 p.m., Lee placed a telephone call to Floyd. At 12:32 p.m., Lee sends a text message to Floyd. At 8:10 p.m., Floyd placed a telephone call to Schaefer. At 10 p.m., Floyd placed a telephone call to Lee. At 10:19 p.m., Floyd placed a telephone call to Cuddy. At 10:43 p.m., Cuddy placed a telephone call to Floyd. At 11:10 p.m., Cuddy placed a telephone call to Floyd. At 12:12 a.m. on January 5th, Cuddy placed a telephone call to Floyd. On January 4th, Eastman placed a telephone call to Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives Rusty Bowers and solicited, requested, and importuned Bowers to unlawfully appoint presidential electors from Arizona. During the telephone call, Bowers declined to comply with Eastman's request and stated that he would not risk violating his oath of office. On January 4th, Chesborough sent an email to Eastman with the subject "Forward Draft 2 with edits" and included within the body of the email another email that Chesborough previously sent to Giuliani with the subject "Privileged and Confidential Brief Notes on President of Senate Strategy." In the email, Chesborough outlined multiple strategies for disrupting and delaying the joint session of Congress on January 6th, and stated that the outcomes of many of these strategies were preferable to allowing the Electoral Count Act to operate by its terms. On January 4th, Trump and Eastman met with Vice President Mike Pence, Chief of Staff to the Vice President Mark Short, and Counsel to the Vice President Greg Jacob in the Oval Office at the White House. During the meeting, Trump and Eastman argued to Pence that he could either reject electoral votes from certain states or delay the joint session of Congress on January 6th. Oh my God. For the purpose of allowing certain state legislatures to unlawfully appoint presidential electors in favor of Trump. During the meeting, Eastman admitted both options violated the Electoral Count Act, and we saw this in the previous indictment. So this section ends on page 70. Is that right? Let me see what that looks like. I'm getting pretty worn out here. Okay, on page 71. So we got 13 more pages. We can power through it. We'll end there and we'll finish it off next time. Especially if we get a page like this, that's helpful. On January 5th, Ellis wrote a memorandum titled "Re Vice President Authority in Counting Electors Pursuant to U.S. Constitution and 3 U.S. Code," whatever, to an attorney associated with Donald Trump. The memorandum outlined a strategy for disrupting and delaying the joint session of Congress on January 6th and stated the Vice President should begin alphabetically in order of the states and coming first to Arizona, not to open the purported certification, but simply to stop the count at that juncture. Wow. On January 5th, Cheeley, Lee, Floyd, Cuddy, and Hall placed multiple telephone calls to each other and to other individuals involved in the conspiracy. They include the following. At 11:32 a.m., Lee called Cuddy. At 12:14 p.m., Floyd, Cuddy, Lee, and individual 23 participated in a four-way telephone call. At 12:19 p.m., Hall called Cheeley. At 12:34 p.m., Hall called Cheeley. At 1:07 p.m., Cheeley called Hall. At 1:09 p.m., Cheeley called Hall. Two phone calls within 2 minutes of each other? Jesus. At 2:30 p.m., Cheeley called Floyd. At 2:45 p.m., Floyd called Cheeley. At 3:59 p.m., Cheeley called Hall. At 4:42 p.m., Lee called Cheeley. At 4:50 p.m., Lee called Floyd. At 5:05 p.m., Lee called Floyd. Something to note as we're reading these off, like these don't necessarily mean anything without knowing what the contents of those phone calls are, but I'm guessing that's going to come out in later stages of the process. At 7:19 p.m., Cuddy called Cheeley. At 7:48 p.m., Cheeley called Cuddy. At 8:27 p.m., Cheeley called Cuddy. At 8:49 p.m., Cheeley called Lee. At 9:18 p.m., Hall called Cheeley. At 9:31 p.m., Cuddy called Cheeley. At 10:14 p.m., Cheeley called Lee. Should I just skip these? Whatever. I'm already this far. At 11:16 p.m., Cheeley called Cuddy. At 11:25 p.m., Hall called Cheeley. At 11:35 p.m., Cheeley, Cuddy, and Hall participated in a three-way phone call. At 12:09 a.m. on January 6th, Cuddy called Cheeley. On January 5th, Trump caused to be tweeted from his account, "Vice President has the power to reject fraudulently chosen electors." This is untrue, as we have learned. On January 5th, Eastman met with Chief of Staff to the Vice President Mark Short and Counsel to the Vice President Greg Jacob for the purpose of requesting that Vice President Mike Pence reject slates of presidential electors from Georgia and in certain other states during the joint session of Congress on January 6th. On January 5th, Trump met with Vice President Mike Pence in the Oval Office at the White House. During the meeting, Trump stated that Pence had the power to decertify the November 3rd presidential election results, that people cheated, that Pence wanted to play by Marcus of Queensberry rules. What does that even mean? When Pence stated that it was his duty to support and defend the Constitution, that only Congress had the power to decide to reject slates of presidential electors, Trump stated that Pence was naive, implied that he lacked courage, and stated that Pence was doing a great disservice. On January 5th, Trump placed a phone call to Pence. During the phone call, Trump and Eastman attempted to persuade Pence to reject slates of presidential electors or return slates of presidential electors to the state's legislatures. Something you might be asking yourself is like, why do these phone calls have the contents when the other ones don't? The other ones are solely between members of the conspiracy, so they're not gonna they have that has to come out. They're not gonna, I don't know, they're not gonna necessarily cooperate to tell the prosecution what was going on. They might have to figure that out or ask about it or whatever, but it's not going to be here, I guess. That's my guess. Is like, well, Pence can verify what was in that conversation, but it's only conspirators in the other ones. So on January 5th, Trump placed a second phone call to Pence. During the phone call, Trump asked Pence if he had received a copy of a letter from a group of Pennsylvania legislators urging Congress to return the state's electoral college votes, and stated to Pence, "You got to be tough tomorrow." On January 5th, Trump issued a statement through the Trump campaign that falsely stated, "The vice president and I are in total agreement that the vice president has the power to act. Our vice president has several options under the U.S. Constitution. He can decertify the results or send them back to the states for challenge and certification. He can also decertify the illegal and corrupt results and send them to the House of Representatives for the one vote for the one. Wait, what? House of Representatives for the one vote for one state tabulation." Uh, on January 6th, Latham placed a call to Hall. Several hours later, Hall placed a telephone call to Latham. During at least one of the phone calls, they discussed Hall's request to assist with the unlawful breach of election equipment at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office in Coffee County, Georgia. On January 6th, Trump appeared and spoke at a rally at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. During the rally, Trump made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd presidential election in Georgia and elsewhere, solicited Vice President Mike Pence to disrupt and delay the joint session of Congress on January 6th, 2021, and encouraged those in attendance at the rally to march to the U.S. Capitol. On January 6th, Giuliani appeared and spoke at the rally at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. During the rally, Giuliani made false statements concerning fraud in the November 3rd election in Georgia and elsewhere, and solicited Vice President Mike Pence to disrupt and delay the joint session of Congress on January 6th. On January 6th, Eastman appeared and spoke at a rally at the Ellipse in Washington. Excuse me. During the rally, Eastman made false statements concerning fraud in the presidential election and solicited Vice President Mike Pence to disrupt and delay the joint session of Congress on January 6th. On January 6th, Trump caused to be tweeted from his account, "If Vice President Mike Pence comes through for us, we will win the presidency. Many states want to decertify the mistake they made in certifying incorrect and even fraudulent members in a process not approved by their state legislators, which they must be. Mike can send it back." Yeah, and every part of that was untrue. They didn't want to decertify. They didn't make a mistake. These members were approved by their legislatures. Yeah. On January 6th, Trump caused to be tweeted from his account, "States want to correct their votes, which they now know were based on irregularities and fraud, plus corrupt process never received legislative approval. All Mike Pence has to do is send them back to the states, and we win. Do it, Mike. This is a time for extreme courage." On January 6th, Trump placed a telephone call to Mike Pence and solicited him to disrupt and delay the joint session of Congress on January 6th. When Pence refused, Trump stated that Pence would go down as a wimp and that Pence was not protecting the United States. On January 6th, Eastman sent an email to the Vice President, Greg Jacob. Oh, to the counsel to the Vice President Greg Jacob that stated, one moment, getting dry mouth. It's so much reading. The Senate and House have both violated the Electoral Count Act this evening, and they debated the Arizona objections for more than 2 hours. Violations of the statute and the VP allowed further debate or statements by leadership after the question had been voted upon. Violations of whatever of 3 USC 17, I guess. And they had that debate upon motion approved by the VP in violation of the requirement of 3 USC 15 that after the vote is in separate houses, they shall immediately again meet. So now that the precedent has been set that the Electoral Count Act is not quite so sacrosanct that it was as it was previously claimed, I implore you to consider one more relatively minor violation and adjourn for 10 days to allow the legislatures to finish their investigations as well as to allow a full forensic audit of the massive amount of illegal activity that has occurred here. If none of that moves the needle, at least a good portion of the 75 million people who supported President Trump will have seen a process that allows the illegality to be aired. John. There's a lot to unpack here. One is I love the irony of like, listen, there's been massive amounts of illegal activity. Yeah, there has by the Trump campaign and this criminal conspiracy organization. Uh, but also like, oh, there was like this minor violation, so now we should have a major one. It's fine now. The seal is broken. Uh, and then cap it all off with more or less a threat of like, listen, there are 75 million people who wouldn't like it if you didn't do this, you know. Um, wow, yeah, there's a lot there. On January 7th, Latham sent a text message to the chief operations officer of Sullivan Strickler LLC with the address for the Douglas Municipal Airport in Coffee County, Georgia, to coordinate picking up Hall from the airport and driving him to the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office for the purpose of assisting with the unlawful breach of election equipment at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office. This was an act of racketeering. On January 7th, Hall and individual 24 flew from uh, DeKalb Peachtree Airport in DeKalb County, Georgia, to Douglas Municipal Airport in Coffee County, Georgia, for the purpose of assisting with the unlawful breach of election equipment at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office. On January 7th, Powell, Latham, excuse me, Hall, and Hampton committed the felony offense of interference with primaries and elections in Coffee County, Georgia, by willfully and unlawfully tampering with electronic ballot markers and tabulating machines in Coffee County, Georgia. On January 7th, Powell, Latham, Hall, and Hampton committed the felony offense of unlawful possession of ballots in Coffee County, Georgia, by causing certain members of the conspiracy who were not officers charged by law with the care of ballots and who were not persons entrusted by any such officer with the care of ballots for a purpose required by law to possess official ballots outside of the polling place in Coffee County, Georgia. On January 7th, Powell, Latham, Hall, and Hampton committed the felony offense of computer theft by using a computer with knowledge that such use was without authority and with the intention of taking and appropriating information, data, software, and the property of Dominion Voting Systems Corporation in Coffee County, Georgia. On January 7th, Powell, Latham, Hall, and Hampton committed the felony offense of computer trespass in Coffee County, Georgia, by using a computer with knowledge that such use was without authority and with the intention of removing voter data and Dominion Voting Systems Corporation data from said computer in Coffee County, Georgia. On January 7th, Powell, Latham, Hall, and Hampton committed the felony offense of computer invasion of privacy by using a computer with the intention of examining personal voter data with knowledge that such examination was without authority. Between December 6th, 2020 and January 7th, 2021, Powell, Latham, Hall, and Hampton committed the felony offense of conspiracy to defraud the state by unlawfully conspiring and agreeing to commit theft of voter data property which was under the control of Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a state officer in his official capacity. On January 9th, 10th, 11th, and 13th, individual 25 unlawfully accessed certain data copied from Dominion voting systems equipment at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office in Coffee County, Georgia, by downloading said data from a server maintained by Sullivan Strickler LLC. On January 9th, 10th, 11th, 18th, and 19th, individual 26 unlawfully accessed certain data copied from Dominion voting systems equipment at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office in Coffee County, Georgia, by downloading said data from a server maintained by Sullivan Strickler LLC. On January 10th, 12th, 13th, 25th, and 20 or on January 10th, January 12th, January 13th, February 25th, and February 26th of 2021, individual 27 unlawfully accessed certain data copied from Dominion voting systems equipment at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office in Coffee County, Georgia, by downloading said data from a server maintained by Sullivan Strickler LLC. On January 13th, individual 28 unlawfully accessed certain data copied from Dominion voting systems equipment at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office in Coffee County, Georgia, by downloading said data from a server maintained from. Okay. On January 18th, Hampton allowed individual 25 and individual 29 to access non-public areas of the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office in Coffee County, Georgia, and facilitated their access to Dominion voting systems equipment. On April 22nd, individual 28 sent an email to the Chief Operations Officer of Sullivan Strickler LLC, directing him to transmit all data copied from Dominion voting systems equipment at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office in Coffee County, Georgia, to unindicted co-conspirator individual 30, an attorney associated with Powell and the Trump campaign. We're almost done. We're almost done with this this portion. We got just a couple more pages. Yeah, we just read that one. All right. On September 17th, 2021, Trump committed the felony offense of solicitation of violation of oath by public officer by unlawfully soliciting, requesting, and importuning Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a public officer, to engage in conduct constituting the felony offense of violation of oath of a public officer by unlawfully decertifying the election or whatever the correct legal remedy is and announce the true winner in willful and intentional violation of the terms of the oath, and so on. On September 17th, and by the way, like as a note, like notice he's like still at it 9 months later, still like, hey, you should like go and decertify the election results that have already been like it's all done and dusted. But he was like, remember, he was telling his fans that he was going to get reinstated as president. Some of them still think he's going to be reinstated. We're in the next election cycle, and they're like, he's just going to be reinstated because he was the rightful president. We will retroactively have not had the Biden years. Like the insanity is overwhelming. On September 27th, Trump committed the felony offense of false statements and writings by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making the following false statement and representation to Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. As stated to you previously, the number of false and or irregular votes is far greater than needed to change the Georgia election result. This one's a little weird to me because he was told this previously, but that statement, what he was told previously, was just not true. However, this statement that he was told a thing would be true, wouldn't it? I don't know. But it implies the truth of the previous statement, which is not the case, right? On April 25th, Schaefer committed the felony offense of false statements and writings by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements and representations in the presence of Fulton County District Attorney's Office investigators: that he attended and convened the December 14th, 2020 meeting of Trump presidential elector nominees in Fulton County, Georgia, but that he did not call each of the individual members and notify them of the meeting or make any of the other preparations necessary for the meeting. We saw previously in this indictment that he did. That a court reporter was not present at the December 14th meeting, even though I guess there was. Uh, on May 7th, Powell made at least one of the following false statements and representation in a sworn deposition with the United States House of Representatives Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Okay, I was wondering, I was like, if this is more false statements, why is this not a charge of false statements in writing or with perjury or whatever? The reason why is it's not Georgia's jurisdiction. She was lying in Congress, not in Georgia. That she didn't have any role in really setting up efforts to access voting machines in Coffee County, Georgia, or Antrim County, Michigan. That she was aware that there was an effort by some people to get access to voting machines in Georgia, but that she did not know what happened with that and did not remember whether that was Rudy or other folks. On September 1st, Latham committed the felony offense of perjury in Houston County, Georgia, by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements in a deposition in the matter of Curling versus Raffensperger in the United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia, a judicial proceeding, after having been administered a lawful oath. That she was only present at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office in Coffee County, Georgia for just a few minutes on January 7th. That she only walked into the front part of the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office on January 7th and didn't go into the office. That she had no idea if employees of Sullivan Strickler met Eric Cheney at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office on the 7th. That she did not see Misty Hampton at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office on January 7th. That her only interaction with Scott Hall at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office on January 7th was meeting him, speaking to him outside of the office, and then leaving the office. That she did not see Scott Hall speak to anyone other than herself at the Coffee County Board of Elections and Registration Office on the 7th. On September 15th, Sheely committed the felony offense of perjury by knowingly, willfully, and unlawfully making at least one of the following false statements before the Fulton County Special Purpose Grand Jury, a judicial proceeding, and after having been administered a lawful oath. That he was unaware of the December 14th meeting of Trump presidential elector nominees in Fulton County, Georgia, until after the meeting had already taken place. They had no substantive conversations with anyone concerning the December 14th meeting until after the meeting had already taken place. That he never suggested to anyone that the Trump presidential elector nominees in Georgia should meet on December 14th. That the only communication he had with John Eastman concerning the November 3rd presidential election was for the purpose of connecting Eastman to Georgia Senator Brandon Beach and Individual 8 for possible legal representation. That he never worked to connect John Eastman with any Georgia legislators other than Georgia Senator Brandon Beach and Individual 8. And so the acts set forth above were committed in furtherance of the conspiracy alleged above and had the same and similar interests, results, accomplices, victims, and methods of commission, and otherwise were interrelated by distinguishing characteristics and were not isolated acts. So that's the end of count 1. The first count, remember, is the RICO statute. This is the racketeering and criminal organization thing. It's weird because it's only 16 pages left, but I am exhausted. We're gonna leave it here, and we're gonna come back to this. We'll do a part 2 on Monday, I suppose. But notice we have a lot of the groundwork for the other counts. I guess the rest of this is just laying out the counts. And actually, that being the case, maybe we don't even need to come back to this. We will on Monday, and if it proves not particularly valuable, then we'll just stop. But yeah, this has all been very interesting. A lot to go through, but glad we're doing it. The due diligence, it's necessary. That all being said, thank you everyone so much for watching. Oh, another thing I wanted to I wanted to mention was apparently this judge is very insistent that these defendants don't get any special treatment. They'll be processed just like everyone else. And so I personally am excited for the mugshots. They are supposed to be taken. That is the plan, I guess. I think that happens. That might happen during arraignment. I'm not exactly sure. As far as I know, they're not out yet. But if we find them, we will look at them because that will be interesting. The first president with mugshots. Jeez. Um, but yeah, we'll be going over the rest of this on Monday. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.